Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Brode from Deep Knowledge Investing. We work with hedge funds, family offices, registered investment advisors, and individuals like you to help you get better returns in the stock market. I am here with two people today. Our ever popular host, Robb Fahrion. He's the CEO and founder of Flying V, our digital marketing partner. We also have DKI star intern, Andrew Brown from the University of Tennessee here. I just want to let all of you know I spoke with one of Andrew's future professors today, professor at the finance guy at the University of Tennessee. And so if this doesn't go well, we can have him thrown out of school. If you don't like this, click the down button, do not subscribe, click the dislike button, whatever it is, and we can get Andrew thrown out of school. Now, if you don't want that to happen, subscribe and click like, and we'll keep him on. It is up to you. Andrew's fate is in your hands.
Sounds like a great way to start the issue this week. And looks like we're just kind of picking fights all over the place, Gary, because this week we've got the central bankers are delusional issue. I appreciate the easier to read title for this week's five things, but it looks like we're going after the central bankers now.
Yeah, look, it's not so much that we're going after them, it's that they're doing really stupid things. We're not going after them. We are merely describing their position. If people listening to this or watching this were to determine that they're doing stupid things, then, all we've done is just explain it, but, draw your own conclusions on this.
Great episode this week. Glad Andrew's here to join us. We're going to talk about more irony coming from the Fed governors. Google and Amazon, we're talking about what they're doing as it relates to nuclear energy. So, obviously, something that's been a priority topic on DKI's five things in the past. We've got Taiwan Semiconductor, Nvidia making an appearance, the European Central Bank, as we just alluded to, as well as talking some Bitcoin and University of Tennessee finance students asking good questions. I think I got an idea where that comes from. Gary, you ready to jump right into it?
Let's go.
Thing number one, Gary, we talked about just a minute ago the irony, and Fed governors proclaim the Fed has an infinite amount of dollars, but they're also saying that Bitcoin is worth zero. So again, we got another issue of breaking the irony meter. Thing number one, Gary, there's an infinite amount of cash carries with CASH all in capitals as a part of his name. Ignorance at the Federal Reserve. Gary, tell us what Neil's saying.
Yeah, so that one, that title was a little bit of intern wordplay. The Federal Reserve Governor we're talking about is Neil Kashkari, Kashkari, and one of our great interns changed that to Kashkari, Cashkari. First of all, just a side point on this, Rob. This is the chattiest bunch of Fed governors I have ever seen in my life. Every week, these guys are in front of TV cameras talking about their view on the economy. It was not this way in the past. The Fed would just inform you what the Fed funds rate is. I am firmly in the belief that if you want to interview a Federal Reserve governor, all you have to do is go to the end of your driveway, put an unguarded microphone there, and they'll just start showing up because these guys can't resist a microphone and camera. Anyway, Kashkari uh, told us that there is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. Let's give them credit for telling the truth in public. This is true. They just push a button, they create digital dollars, and here we are. And if any of you want to know why we're experiencing so much inflation, why the price of everything is going up, why your dollars aren't going as far, that's the reason. The Federal Reserve, aided by Congress and the Treasury Department, are debasing your dollars. And that's just a fancy way of saying they are creating more dollars. And when they do that, the value of the dollars you own go down. So their plan is to continue to debase the dollar. It's going to be to continue to reduce the purchasing power of the dollars that you hold. Now, Kashkari, somehow not aware of the irony on this, last week said, we're quoting, Bitcoin remains worthless after 12 years. First of all, Bitcoin's been around for more than 12 years, but that's not the key point. Bitcoin at this point is the sixth largest monetary asset in the world. Credit to One Base Money on X for that. He put up the chart. But the value of Bitcoin, Rob, is its scarcity. Bitcoin has a hard cap of 21 million coins. No more than that will ever be created. So unlike fiat currency, fiat is just a fancy name for a government sponsored currency like the dollar. Bitcoin can't be debased. Kashkari while he is in the process of debasing the dollar down to zero, is criticizing Bitcoin, which is growing in purchasing power and can't be debased. How is that not the craziest thing you've heard in the central banking world this week?
Gary, it seems like the only thing that's worthless is the idea, and especially what Kashkar is saying here, that endless money printing doesn't have consequences. I know your position, Bitcoin being a hedge against inflation. Tell us again how critical it is for individuals to take this seriously, especially with the amount of printing we're seeing these days.
Well, it is only important if you care about not being poor. If you want to be poor, then great. You know, the dollars you
Mark that
have,
one, Andrew. We need that in a quote, I believe,
right?
somewhere on some graphic.
Right. Because, you know, Rob, we've talked about this a lot. You cannot save in dollars. And the reason is the purchasing power of those dollars will go down each year. And, you know, just last week, whenever anybody on X was talking about Kashkari saying Bitcoin is worthless, we put up a graph showing the purchasing power of the US dollar since the establishment of the Federal Reserve about 110 years ago, 111 years ago, something like that. And what you see is that the purchasing power of the dollar has been crushed as the number of dollars in circulation have increased. And that will continue. They have made it crystal clear that's going to continue. So if you want to hold dollars, the purchasing power of those dollars will decline. If you want to make money, you either need to be in one, assets that can produce cash and grow. So in our case, we're looking at publicly traded equities, at stocks. We invest in high growth stocks where we feel like there's the opportunity to make 2, 3, 4, 10 times your money over, you know, the next 3, 5, 7 years, something like that. Um, Alternatively, you want to invest in other kinds of monetary assets where you can't just easily create so many more. So we've spoken a lot about gold and Bitcoin. Just this year, at the last halving, Bitcoin became harder than gold, which is just a fancy way of saying that the rate of increase in the supply of Bitcoin as a percentage of the supply of Bitcoin is now lower than it is with gold. And the rate of gold inflation, meaning the increase in gold supply every year, tends to be about 1.5–2%. Bitcoin's even lower than that right now. The dollar, much, much higher. And so that's why we're seeing gold at all-time highs, Bitcoin at near all-time highs after being up more than 2x this year. And the dollar continues to lose purchasing power. So, you know, we are seeing the real-time results of good monetary policy versus bad monetary policy. And the Federal Reserve is on the side of bad monetary policy. Kashkari has this one wrong.
Gary, thing number two, we're going to move to Google and Amazon. Google, obviously, ticker GOOG, and Amazon, AMZN. We're talking about both of them investing more in nuclear energy to power their AI data centers. Uranium has been on a nice run here over the last week or so. Thing number two, Gary, Google's nuclear energy investment fuels DKI's bullish stance on uranium.
Well, Rob, you know, we have been long uranium for years. It's been an incredibly profitable position for us. It's roughly doubled in value against the dollar over the last couple of years. And in the last 3 weeks, we've seen announcements from Google, Amazon, and Microsoft where they are all either investing in nuclear power or contracting for nuclear power to fuel their AI related data centers. Now, I could talk to you about that a lot, but Andrew's the one who did the work on this. So, Andrew, let's go to you. What are your thoughts on nuclear energy, AI data centers, and these big tech companies? What are you seeing?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Gary and Rob, and it's good to be back. But back to uranium. So this is a big topic. It's a big part of DKI's kind of overall thesis on nuclear energy and whatnot. And to kind of think about this, we got to take a step back. And if we think about this, for the past about 30 to 70 years, I mean, we haven't really grown our nuclear footprint across the country. Ever since kind of you've had your disasters across the world, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, those kind of slowed the kind of consumer acceptance of nuclear energy. But now with this new AI space race, you know, the sentiment of nuclear energy is so much better because the technology has gotten a lot better with the small modular reactors, and then also the huge investment just because these data centers do not need coal or natural gas to power. And if we think about it, wind and solar, those are not baseline power. There's no energy there that you can produce at night or if the wind's not blowing. And really the only renewable energy there is uranium or is nuclear, which means more uranium supply ultimately. And interesting enough, so in the past few weeks, we've had Amazon, Microsoft, and now Google make a big commitment to buy power from Kairos Energy. And what's interesting about this company, Kairos, is about 30 miles north of Knoxville, Tennessee, where I'm a student at the University of Tennessee, is Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And that goes way back to the Manhattan Project. And it's a big nuclear facility, very heavily guarded and whatnot. And that's where they're actually developing this small modular reactor, which is a lot different from your reactors that you see kind of on lakes and whatnot. But this one, in a classic reactor, it uses cold water, so water from lakes and rivers to cool that reactor. But here, they're developing a new technology where they use a salt to cool the the reactor, which is extremely different because let's think about I hear the analogy, well, let's just put all the nuclear power plants in the desert. Well, there's no water in the desert. So this is a huge kind of advancement if they nail this technology. Now, is this plant finished? No, but kind of have it giving the backbone of Google and Microsoft and all these companies with these small modular reactor companies, there's a lot more possibility for growth. And ultimately, uranium is going to have to, the need is just going to grow. I mean, if we think about it right now, we talked about Kazatomprom a few months ago and how they're struggling to ramp up supply, and ultimately demand's rising while supply is just kind of staying stagnant and falling. And as Gary has mentioned in the past, the price ultimately has to rise here. So it's very interesting what's going on here in the development, and AI is just kind of playing a big role in this. I mean, I know people like to talk about AI and Nvidia and AMD and Taiwan Semiconductor, which we'll talk about later today. But this is kind of also an indirect way to invest in AI.
All good points, Andrew. You know, when people are talking about putting these new plants out in the desert, they're forgetting a few things, right? One, not just the water and the cooling, but you have transmission issues. There is a limit to how far you can transmit electricity without too much loss. The other reason this is crucial is because if you have an AI data center, you need 99.999% reliability uptime. You can't get that with wind, with solar, with any of these, carbon-free options. And so we really have two choices. It's either permit more natural gas and coal here in the United States, which is going to be very difficult to do from a political point of view. The environmentalists won't like that. Or if you want reliable power to power this AI revolution, and you want to do it without putting more carbon in the atmosphere, nuclear is your only option. It's also worth pointing out that, people understandably have fears about what happened at 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, Chernobyl. But take a look. Nobody has died because of a nuclear power plant accident in the last 50 years. That is not the case for other forms of energy. And more importantly, these small modular reactors and these Gen 4 and Gen 5 nuclear reactors, they do not melt down. They're not subject to the same kinds of problems. People also like to say, oh, but you're going to create nuclear waste and it's going to be a mess. First of all, the nuclear waste that we have actually can be buried underground in barrels. It takes up very little space. But more importantly, these new Gen 4 and SMR plants, small modular reactors, they eat nuclear waste. They use it. It's fuel for them. So it's a great way to get rid of nuclear waste. So there are a lot of misperceptions out there on this. Most importantly, Andrew, talk for a minute about the graph that you're going to put up, because to me, the key thing when we're looking at the supply and demand curve, and you'll throw up the graph here, all of that red is a shortfall. Every bit of red on that graph is the world saying we need more uranium to power these plants. and the suppliers saying we don't have it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a great. I mean, this kind of backs the whole DKI case here for uranium. I mean, we've got projected demand going way up, while the supply and the sources are decreasing, and the prospective mines are just kind of staying steady. And really, I mean, like I said earlier, this just ultimately results in a higher price of uranium. And I mean, this is a great graph by Bloomberg and the World Nuclear Association that kind of just shows that overall, long term, growth is going to stay probably stagnant while the demand for uranium is going way up. And really, I mean, this is a long term trend. I mean, like we said earlier, these plants take some time to go into effect. So really, this is kind of just delaying how long of the trend this can be, and whatnot.
All right. Great job, Andrew. Or at least that's my view for the viewers here. Remember, you have a big responsibility. If you don't like what Andrew had to say, hit dislike, unsubscribe. We're going to get him thrown out of school. I spoke with one of his professors today. If you want to save Andrew, click like and subscribe, and we will keep him on and make sure he doesn't get thrown out of school. It is up to you.
It is up to
Everyone please like it, please. I don't need that. My parents would not be happy with that. They would not.
the fate of Andrew is in the DKI community's hands. So we'll see how that one plays
Save
out.
him, YouTube. Save him.
Yeah.
That's
Great
not a
job,
good
guys,
hope.
on
YouTube is
thing
never a
number
good
two.
hope.
Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
I said YouTube is never a good hope, but
Yeah. Yeah, we've been maybe this will be the one thing that gets everybody really going. You know, Gary and I have been trying to poke and prod at the community. So we'll see. Maybe this is what they'll take a liking to. So Andrew's fate in your hands. Let us know in the comments. Great job, guys. Thing number two. Thing number three, we're moving to Taiwan Semiconductor TSM. They beat earnings, indicating demand for AI chips continues to grow. Again, great news for uranium as well. And great news for Nvidia as we get into thing number two, thing number three, excuse me.
Yeah.
TSMC crushes earnings, Gary.
All right. So a week ago, or rather 2 weeks ago, no, sorry, it was last week. We got bad results from ASML. They are a chip manufacturer. They reported disappointing earnings and guidance, and the market said, oh no, it's the end of this AI revolution. Nobody's buying chips. We're in bad shape. Well, guess what? A day later, Taiwan Semiconductor came out. They crushed it. Revenue of $23.5 billion was up 36% year over year, up 13% from the prior quarter. And they gave guidance for, great projections for the rest of the year. Taiwan Semi is without question the best chip manufacturer on the planet. There is nobody that can hold a candle to them. But these results reaffirm the market's positive sentiment on AI, and it's been what's driving the market up. And, if you are an Nvidia shareholder, you really like to see this, because if Taiwan Semiconductor is making a lot of AI related chips, that's pretty good for Nvidia's GPU business.
Yeah, I want to ask actually a question based off of that, Gary, and something Andrew just said. By investing uranium, kind of an indirect investment in AI. Do you see it that way, and then vice versa as well?
Yes, I do. But here's a key thing, Rob. Let's imagine for a minute that there's no AI demand. Now I know that's not true. This is a thought experiment. And just say, hey, there's no demand for more AI related data centers. We have everything we need on that. We don't need more NVIDIA chips, no power for that. Okay. But the fact is that most of the world wants to live at a more comfortable material quality of life. And when you're looking at quality of life, and we're not talking about spirituality or health, we're just talking about your material quality of life. There is a almost 100% correlation between that and energy usage. And so, one of the things we've talked about a lot is there are roughly 3 billion people in China and India that want to live better lives. There are people all over the world that want to use more energy and be more comfortable. On top of that, there's all this talk, the electrification of everything. Governments all over the world want people to be driving electric cars. I read somewhere that having an electric car increases your energy usage the same as putting a couple dozen extra refrigerators in your home. That's a lot, right? And we don't have the infrastructure for that. It needs to be built. So you are 100% right that AI demand creates power demand, and that particular high reliability power demand means they're going to need nuclear. And what I'm saying is, beyond that, even without that, you have more energy needs, more energy usage, more demand for nuclear power than we have uranium supply right now. And that supply has been coming down. When we first uh, took on our position in uranium, the world had roughly a 5-year excess supply. That's now down to 2 years. So within the next year or two, people are going to be panicking and saying, we need to lock in supply. And the only way you're going to get that is to pay up for it. And we want to be there when that happens.
Great stuff, Gary. Andrew, anything to add on that point or that thing? Or did Andrew?
I think he had it off.
He said bye.
Yeah.
All right. Not good for the audience. Andrew just left us hanging, and I wasn't aware of it on the show notes. So
I know.
Keep that in mind when you're voting for Andrew's fate. Thing number 4, Gary. We talked about it earlier. Again, this is the central bankers are delusional issue. The European Central Bank cuts rates, warns of more inflation. Again, we'd send them an irony meter. You said if it wasn't already broken by the Fed. Thing number 4, Gary, ECB's rate cut. Desperation and confusion unveiled.
So, Rob, I asked you earlier, if Kashkari's comments on Bitcoin, when he says there are infinite supply of dollars, but somehow it's Bitcoin that's worth zero. And I said, hey, is that the dumbest thing you've heard by a central banker this week? Well, guess what? We have Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, said, hold my beer, because here I come. Right. This is
my beer. Yeah,
right. Exactly. By the way, one of my favorite follows on X is Rudy Havenstein, the pseudonym for somebody who, like me, is very skeptical of central bankers. And, every few months he does something showing a picture of Christine Lagarde, suggesting that she does not cast a shadow or a reflection in the mirror. I think he believes she's a vampire. I just want to be clear. Deep Knowledge Investing has no proof at all that Christine Lagarde is a vampire. And we are not accusing Christine Lagarde of being a vampire. I just want to be clear. We are in no way suggesting that Christine Lagarde is a vampire. So that those words are out there, and now we've covered that. Anyway, so last week, the ECB lowered their interest rate, their version of the Fed funds rate, by 25 basis points. That's 0.25%, dropping that rate from 3.5% to 3.25%. And at the same time, she issued a warning, which was inflation is expected to rise in the coming months. Now, think that through for a minute. Why does she do this, right? So if you have inflation and you're a central banker, the prescription is you raise interest rates. If you are worried about a bad economy and you feel like you have inflation under control, you would lower interest rates. So lowering interest rates is an inflationary move. So she reduced their version of the Fed funds rate and then said inflation is going to rise. But if inflation is rising, why in the world would you lower rates? That creates more inflation. That's the problem that the central banks are supposedly trying to solve. So you can either assume that she's dumb and engaging in bad policy, and I would not believe that one, or you have to assume that they're not dumb and trying to do something else. And between the two of us, Rob, I would bet on number 2 every time.
So Gary, tell us more about what number 2 means, and then how closely too does this align with what we're seeing over at the Bank of Japan, which obviously you've written about extensively, called very early on in terms of the fall of the yen, in terms of purchasing power.
We think there are 2 issues, right? So like Japan, like the UK, like the United States, the EU, the European Union, has too much debt. And so they're stuck between 2 impossible choices. One is more inflation, right? Lower interest rates, which is what they did. You get more inflation, or alternatively, higher interest expense, right? Because if you raise interest rates, that increases your interest expense. Well, guess what? You have to print more euros in this case to pay for it. And that leads to more inflation. But even worse than all of that, Europe's economy is not doing great. Their energy costs are very high. Their labor costs are high. They live in many ways a very comfortable life with a gigantic social safety network, 35-hour work weeks, months of vacation at a time. It's very appealing, but the problem is when you have a lot of people not producing, you end up with very weak economic growth. And so again, the prescription for that would be to reduce interest rates. Well, if you do that, you're going to get more inflation. So the EU is really heading for stagflation, and they've gotten themselves stuck where no matter what they do, they have a gigantic problem. And so, here we are. And this is the same thing we've been talking about in Japan for the last 2 years. Japan is facing a very similar problem. And, these are issues that we have here in the United States where we have too much debt, too much inflation, and the Federal Reserve here is reducing interest rates into increasing inflation. The only difference is, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who we also are certain is not a vampire. But, Powell is smart enough to not say we're lowering interest rates and inflation is going up. Now, is that happening? Yeah, it is, but he was at least smart enough not to say it.
Great stuff in thing number 4, Gary. And as always, really encourage everyone, jump to deepknowledgeinvesting.com before we finish this 5th thing. Sign up for a free subscription, join our free list. You'll be notified of new content. Premium subscribers will be the only ones that have access to premium content, material, current recommendations, buys, and then when position closes as well. Be sure to check that out. And students, one thing to mention, sometimes it's often forget, we also have discount rates for you as well if you're interested in jumping in and grabbing a DKI subscription. Gary, 5th thing, again, going to our investment research. This time we've got a question out of the University of Tennessee, assuming one of Andrew's finance buddies ask a great question as it relates to Bitcoin. So to close out this week's edition, the central bankers are delusional issue. Got a question about Bitcoin, Gary, and it is thing number 5. What are you actually buying when you invest in Bitcoin?
Yeah, this is a phenomenal question. And, one of the sort of the follow-up question that the student asked, he wants to know, is Bitcoin like the dollar or more like an asset such as gold? And I think these are 2 phenomenal questions. So first of all, what are you buying when you invest in Bitcoin? And basically, you are buying a notation in the blockchain that says a particular Bitcoin or a particular fraction of a Bitcoin belongs to you. And, it's one of the key reasons why we recommend self-custody, because it's yours and you should have it. You should have custody of it. If you own Bitcoin and you need help with self-custody, reach out. We will help you with that. Whatever you do, do not leave it on the exchanges. If you leave your Bitcoin on the exchange, you do not own that Bitcoin. You are an unsecured creditor to Coinbase or, one of the other platforms. So technically what you own is a notation on the blockchain that says this is yours. But the key thing is it's the limited supply. And so at this point, approximately 95% of all Bitcoin that will ever be mined have already been mined. And over the next, almost 150 years, a little bit less than that, the remaining 5% will be mined until the total of 21 million Bitcoin are mined. There will never be any more than that. And it's that digital scarcity that gives Bitcoin value at a time when every central bank is printing and printing and printing and creating currency and debasing their currencies. And we're all experiencing that through inflation. We also have seen a lot of situations where governments have tried to use the banks to say, hey, you bank cannot fund this business, or, hey, we don't like your politics or your comments or your social media posts, and so we're going to deny you banking services. And we saw that in Canada just, a couple of years ago during the trucker incident, the trucker protest. Now, whether you agree with the truckers or not doesn't matter. You can agree or disagree, but the key thing is they were debanked. With Bitcoin, that can't happen. And so what you have with Bitcoin is you have something where you have digital scarcity and a notation guaranteeing your ownership of it. It can't be taken away by the government. That follow-up question, is Bitcoin more like the dollar or more like gold? I think it's a phenomenal question, in my opinion, and people may have a different point of view. If you have a different point of view, put it in the comments. I think it's a hybrid. So I think Bitcoin is a lot like gold because you have a relatively limited amount of supply. It's very hard, meaning the increase is, in the case of gold, about 1.5% per year. In the case of Bitcoin, less than that. So that's your increase in supply as a percentage of the supply that you have. And so in that way, I think it's a lot like gold. The way it's like the dollar is Bitcoin can be used like a currency. Now, gold has been considered money for thousands of years, but gold is very hard to spend, right? You can't go to a coffee shop or a clothing store. You go buy a car. You can't say, hey, here are a few ounces of gold and, give me a car. It just doesn't work that way. You'd have to sell it for dollars. But in the case of Bitcoin, and, El Salvador has been doing incredible work on this, but I've seen it in plenty of other places. You can actually use Bitcoin like a currency and use it to buy a coffee or a car. In some places, including Japan, you can use Bitcoin to pay your taxes. And, people will point out, well, you're not really paying for it in Bitcoin. There's a currency conversion happening. Yeah, all of that's true. It is not a perfect analog. This is not a perfect example, but this is the direction we're heading, and I like it. I'm in favor of people having more economic freedom. I'm in favor of people having more control of their financial health, and Bitcoin does that for people. It takes them out of the debased fiat monetary system. It means they don't need a bank, and it gives people more freedom. And for that alone, we're huge fans. Deep Knowledge Investing recommended Bitcoin, I want to say 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, something like that, when it was 15,000. Yeah,
Right
I
around
think it
that.
was the fourth quarter of 2020. So 4 years ago, it's up 4.5x since then in dollars. And if you're holding Bitcoin, the price of whatever you would buy it with, whether you're buying a house or a car or whatever it is going down in Bitcoin, where in dollars those prices are going up. So, I think everybody should own some Bitcoin. Also worth pointing out, last I checked, there were $44 million millionaires in the world and a total of 21 million Bitcoin. So if every millionaire in the world wanted to own one Bitcoin, they can't do it. Go get yourself a Bitcoin. You'll have something that there will be millionaires that can't ever own.
Gary, one of the questions is why would you be comfortable with the value of the dollar, right? When you're talking about the value of Bitcoin versus the value of the dollar, the response is backed by faith and credit. Why is that problematic with the situation that we find ourselves in?
So one thing I find really interesting is people, and I think this is a normal, understandable question. They say, hey, but what do you really own if you own Bitcoin? It's just a notation on a ledger. What if it's stolen? What if it's a fraud? And I understand this. People grew up using cash, and so they feel comfortable with it. And Bitcoin is newish technology, and they're saying, wait a minute, how do we know? How do we know this is real? How do we know it'll maintain its value? What do we really have? And these are good questions. But the question I would ask them is, why are you comfortable holding dollars? Why do you think the dollar has value? Because the dollar used to be backed by gold, and now it's backed by faith and credit. And as we've said before, if you want to deal with faith, then, deal with your local clergyman. There are priests and rabbis and other clergy people that will help you with issues of faith. But in this case, when it's the US government, you would have to have faith in the credit of an organization that is $36 trillion in debt, that is printing trillions of additional dollars to pay off debts. We are now at the point where we are printing dollars to pay the interest expense on dollars that we printed last year. And we've used this terminology before, but if that to you sounds a little bit like a Ponzi scheme, you got it. It is exactly what a Ponzi scheme is. The US dollar at this point, despite being the world's reserve currency, is in full Ponzi status. We are printing to pay the interest on last year's printing. And So that is where they're going. And they've made it crystal clear that that is going to continue. Congress, the Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department, they're going to do nothing to stop this. The dollar is going to be debased into oblivion. And so why are you comfortable owning dollars and questioning Bitcoin? And if you're somebody who's saying, okay, wait, but I don't know, I'm not sure. Okay, totally fair point. But then don't be a Bitcoin maxi. Take a 1% position. Take 1% of your assets, buy Bitcoin with it, leave it alone. And if it works, then it'll be a meaningful return for you. And if it doesn't, then you take a 1% loss and you live to fight another day.
Great stuff, Gary, on this week's version of the 5 Things. This version was titled "The Central Bankers Are Delusional Issue." Plenty of delusion, irony coming from our banks these days. As always, Deep Knowledge Investing is going to keep you in tune with everything happening in the markets during our 5 Things show. Again, please head to our website, deepknowledgeinvesting.com. Consider signing up for a premium subscription. We're confident that you'll see the value and potential return in the different positions that Gary's putting out, when to buy, also when he's closing out positions, research and information, stock tips, etc., the whole 9 yards, as well as just keeping a pulse on the market in general. We also have a free version that you can sign up for that will run you into some paywalls for the premium content, but you'll at least be notified when new content and material comes out, as well as some non-paid version of content that we do produce on a regular basis as well. Gary, any closing thoughts?
Just a few, Rob. First of all, thanks for doing this. Always enjoy our weekly chats. Round of applause for DKI's interns, Andrew and Alex, who do a phenomenal job on this piece every week. Really appreciate their efforts. Round of applause as well for the University of Tennessee Finance Program. They are turning out some really top students at a place where, when you're talking about top business programs, they might not be the first name to come to mind, but the people I've spoken with there are impressive. And so round of applause for them. They're doing a phenomenal job preparing their young people for careers in finance. I think the intellectual horsepower we're seeing coming out of that program is fantastic. I'd put them up against anybody I've seen. And we've seen that a lot, Rob. A lot of our interns have come from places like Hofstra and Rutgers. But boy, those kids are in many ways better prepared than some of the Ivy League kids I've seen. So good for them. They're doing a terrific job. And then for everyone watching this, I just want to thank you for your time. We know it's valuable. We appreciate you spending that time with us every week, and we will look forward to seeing you with 5 new things a week from today. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.